Right now on News 19.
It's a red herring, ladies and gentlemen.
We've heard closing arguments in the double murder trial of Alex Murdaugh. 6 weeks of witnesses, some of them mournful.
You encouraged her to go to Minnesota.
I did.
Some of them angry.
What he did to his family, he did it in a very callous way, a very deceitful way.
It's all led to this. Each side has made their case.
To find Alex Murdaugh guilty, not believable.
Now the jury must make their decision. Andrea Mock is live in Walterboro, and legal experts are standing by. News 19 starts right now. And welcome into Murdaugh After Hours again. In case you haven't heard the news, after only 3 hours of deliberation today, the jury found Murdaugh guilty of all charges. Alex Murdaugh guilty on all charges, murdering his wife Maggie, murdering his son Paul. Here was that verdict read just a short time ago.
Docket number 2022 GS 15-00592, the State of South Carolina, County of Colleton, in the Court of General Sessions in the term of 2022, July, the State versus Richard Alexander Murdaugh, defendant, indictment for murder, SC Code 16-3-0010, CDR Code 0116. You want me to turn it over? Okay. Guilty verdict.
State will be ready at 9:30 in the morning, Your Honor.
We could do it at 9:30 tomorrow morning also.
All right. The defendant is remanded to the custody of the Colleton County Sheriff's Department, and he may be taken away.
All right, you may be a little confused as to what's happening here. The guilty verdict came down this evening after about 3 hours of deliberation. And then the video you saw there of the state and the defense saying they'd be ready at 9:30 in the morning, that is for sentencing of Alex Murdaugh. That's taking place tomorrow morning at 9:30. And then the next video you saw was Murdaugh being taken out of the courtroom. And this is video of him being led into a van as he is being taken to the detention center overnight. Again, Alex Murdaugh walking out of the courthouse, a guilty man tonight on 2 counts of murder for his wife and his son. Our Andrea Mock, she is in Walterboro tonight. She has been following this trial closely. She was in the courtroom earlier today. She is joining us now with her take on what happened this evening. Andrea?
Yeah, JR, actually, I just looked at my watch and realized we first came to our viewers live right here about 12 hours ago, waiting for those closing arguments to finish. And now here we are 12 hours later and already have a verdict. Yes, I was in the courtroom today. I was really impressed with John Medda's rebuttal for his closing arguments. He started off and he said that law enforcement is not on trial here. He said they have presented this and this that they say SLED didn't do and they should have done. He said they've even accused SLED of manufacturing evidence, and he said we take offense to that. He went on to say they have created a smoke screen so that if you pay attention to everything law enforcement didn't do, you will then pay attention to you will hopefully not pay attention to what Alex Murdaugh did do. One of the most powerful points to me, John Medda's appealing to the common sense of the jury, and he said, use your common sense. He said, why would you go visit your elderly mother with Alzheimer's at 9:30 at night? Use your common sense. And then he said again, the OnStar data showed that Alex Murdaugh's SUV pulled up to those kennels, and 19 seconds later, he called 911. And then this is a moment that being in the courtroom, it just sent chills down my spine. He said, if that was me and I pulled up and saw my wife and my son on the ground, he said, I promise you, I would still be on the ground with my son. So that was an incredibly powerful moment. But then Jim Griffin, we know Jim Griffin has a long-standing friendship, and we got to see a little bit of that in court today at his closing arguments. We know that Jim Griffin has been with him from the beginning in this case, in the car, in the SLED interviews, helping him. He tried to say that law enforcement botched this, and that from June 8th, and he held up that big press release that we have seen that the Colleton County Sheriff's Department put out on June 8th saying that the community was not at risk. He held that up and he said they knew right away they had their man and he didn't have a chance. But then on rebuttal, when John Meadors spoke, he said, really? Alec didn't have a chance? He said, and he named all the dates of those SLED interviews. He said he had a chance to tell the truth on this date. He had a chance to tell the truth on this date. He had a chance to tell the truth on this date, and he never did. And he said, when did Alec finally tell the truth? Not until he found out that his own son had captured him on a Snapchat video and he could no longer lie about not being at the murder scene with the two murder victims about 4 minutes before they died. I want to play for you the last arguments, the last of each of their arguments in court today.
On behalf of Alex, on behalf of Buster, on behalf of Maggie, and on behalf of my friend Paul, I respectfully request that you do not compound a family tragedy with another. Thank you.
It stops here. We respectfully request it stops here today. No, it's not a death. And we're going to exercise our greatest power and find you guilty of killing Maggie and Paul.
So they both got a little bit emotional today, which honestly, I'm not surprised at all. Listen, these lawyers have worked so hard. They have been in this for the long haul. This has been 6 weeks of grueling testimony. But at the end of the day, the jury came back guilty. There were just too many pieces of evidence that couldn't be ignored. For me watching this, one of the most powerful pieces of evidence John Meadors brought up in his closing statement about the .300 blackout rifle. We found out some time ago that those shell casings that were around Maggie Murdaugh's body matched shell casings on the property that were shot out of the same gun. They had a ballistics expert come on and say those .300 blackout rifle shell casings were fired out of the same gun that was used on the Murdaugh family property ages ago. They were so long ago that they were rusting. So then we knew that it was a family weapon. And of course, then the prosecution, drawing all those lines, did this vigilante who was seeking justice in the boating accident show up to Moselle and just know there were going to be those weapons there? And the jury at the end of the day did not buy it. So I am not for one surprised at all. I said I thought that this was going to be a quick verdict. I thought it was going to be guilty. If you were paying attention to all of the prosecution's facts, very hard to deny. And even the judge, Judge Clifton Newman, saying there was an overwhelming evidence of guilt. I thought that was a pretty powerful moment. And now Alex Murdaugh facing 30 years maximum life in prison. So he very well will never see the light of day again. JR.
All right, Andrea, thank you so very much. From outside the courthouse there in Walterboro to inside Studio B here at News 19, Taylor Bell and Lori Murray joining us, our legal experts. Let's get your take on the guilty verdict. Taylor, we'll begin with you.
So it was a lot quicker than I thought it would be. However, hearing closing arguments by Jim today, I didn't see any kind of emotion. I saw a tired individual, a rambling individual. I made the comment, I'm a rambling man, in a group text today, because there was no real line of point there. And then when John Meadors got up there, he knocked it out of the park. So when I saw that, I mentioned that it's going to be quicker than I previously had said.
Lori, your take.
I think the same. I agree with Taylor. I initially thought this was going to be a hung jury, and then we had this whole big closing argument that Jim Griffin did that was, like he said, rambling, and it was lack of emotion, monotonous, monotone. He read part of it. And then you get John Meadows who comes in, which is completely different than what John Meadows came in and gave us what we've been looking for from every attorney this entire time. You know, I mentioned before, I have a friend whose name is Sean Kent, and he is this dynamic attorney in front of a jury. He really emotes and throws everything out there, and it looked like John Meadows had taken a play from his playbook, or page from his playbook. He really got into it at this point, and it really resonated with the jury. I think that had a lot to do with the fastness of this jury verdict. I think that they really took that back. They went into the jury room on that high note, of a high emotional note, and I really think it helped push them over the edge.
6 weeks of testimony, hundreds of pieces of evidence, dozens of witnesses. Taylor, are you surprised? 3 hours? 3 hours to come back with a verdict.
I was, but as I said, closings, that was the deal breaker here today. Closings yesterday by Creighton, and then finishing it up, hitting that, bringing them in for that RBI was John Meadows here today. There was, Creighton, while it was long, it was organized. He had his trilogy. He went, means, motive, opportunity. And today, we had no organization from the defense. I was looking forward to the defense's closing arguments today, and I was really let down. And I think that showed when John Meadows got up there and threw everything he had at that jury emotionally, and it didn't take him long after that.
I'm curious, Lori, you had been critical of Creighton Waters and his closing arguments in this case, but today, with Meadows, is he the unsung hero here? He came in, he seemed very, very emotional at times in this closing argument before the jury. You see him right there. He was pacing back and forth. He seemed agitated. He seemed angry. He seemed upset that the defense was basically saying that SLED and all the other investigators dropped the ball in this case. And that came across to the jury as well.
Absolutely, and he is, yes, definitely the unsung hero in this whole case. The entire time that Jim Griffin was doing his closing arguments, you can see John Meadows over his shoulder in the camera shot taking notes. He was ready for it, and he was. I've known John Meadows for years. I have seen John Meadows try cases. I have worked with him, and this was a John Meadows that I'd never seen before. I mean, it was really, he was ready for it. He was ready to give. It was almost like they've been listening to the social media, because we talked about how Creighton was so much overkill on many things and went way too long and lack of emotion. And John Meadows came in, and he was only an hour, and it was quick, it was to the point, it was fiery, it was what we had been waiting to see from both attorneys throughout all of the attorneys even throughout this entire process. We just never saw a whole lot of emotion come from anybody until Meadows got up there.
At one point during Jim Griffin's closing arguments, Meadows stood up. He objected. Is that something that happens often in closing arguments?
It can happen. Sometimes they do it to throw you off their game. I've done it before in prosecution's arguments. I've objected. But, I think the objection, what was it, not in evidence or something
There
of
was
that
one
nature?
he stood up and said, "We object," because he did to the testimony. He said, "I didn't testify, or I didn't record or do an interview after
Got it.
the documentary." And he said, "We object," because he did. That's not even an objection.
It's not a real objection.
No,
there.
so he just wanted to stand up and get his words in.
Shortly after the verdicts came down, about a little less than an hour ago, State Attorney General Alan Wilson and Creighton Waters, they came outside, they made statements. Alan Wilson basically thanking everybody involved in this case, and also saying that this was a good day for the state of South Carolina. Justice has prevailed for the victims in this case. He took a victory lap outside this evening. That's warranted?
They put a lot of time, energy, and effort and resources into this case. I will give the government credit for that. They did. Alan Wilson, he was there, I think, every day but the first day. He was there supporting his crew, the attorneys that worked for him, his assistants, his chief deputy. He was supporting, and he in fact took a witness himself, which I never imagined that he would take a witness.
Me either.
And he did that, and then he got up there, and part of it was political. Part of it was political, getting up there, grandstanding. However, he needed to thank the folks that did what they were supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we do have the greatest system in the entire world, and that's the jury trial system. And it showed today that we must respect the jury's decision. Both sides got up there, spoke to those 12 people, presented their case, and the jury came back with a verdict.
As you know by now, the actual murder weapons, they were not identified in this case. We kind of know what they were, but they were never found. So there wasn't a gun per se when it comes to that in court. But I've said this and I'll say it again, the smoking gun, if you may want to call it that, was that dog kennel video. We've talked about it over and over and over. The dog kennel video where you clearly can hear Alex Murdaugh in the background. He didn't know that his son Paul had this videotaped on his phone. The state of South Carolina, the prosecution, didn't know that they actually had the video until they recovered it off of Paul Murdaugh's phone in April of last year. And as they said in court yesterday, that's where everything changed. When that dog kennel video was obtained, and you could hear his voice in the background, that blew his alibi up. And that had to be, as I call it, the smoking gun in this case, right?
Absolutely. That's what led to the big lie. Without that one piece of video, and they weren't able to get into Paul's phone until months later, so it's probably one of the reasons why he wasn't charged sooner, because they didn't have that piece of evidence putting him at the kennels. Remember, he left his phone in the house, so there was nothing putting him there. And you have Paul, you know, they would testify that Paul's nickname was the little detective, and here he is reaching back from the grave and providing the one piece of evidence that puts Alex Murdaugh at the scene of the crime within minutes of their time of death, and he could not get around that.
And without that video, Taylor, we may have a different outcome tonight.
I don't necessarily disagree with that. I don't think you would have even had Alex testify if you didn't have that video, because he wouldn't have had to testify. Part of the quick verdict to me might mean the jury wasn't buying what he was trying to sell them when he testified. I think that's part of it. They, you know, all the circumstances led to one person. The one person that said he was there, who previously said he wasn't there, and then he got up there and acknowledged that he was there because he had to do that. And at the end of the day, they didn't believe him and his story of why he was there.
At the end of the day, as you say, no emotion shown in court today by Alex Murdaugh. When those verdicts came down, he just stood there. I mean, there was no tears. He didn't make any kind of face. He didn't grimace. Really nothing, Lori.
No, and you know, I sat there and looked at it just now on your screen there, and I think this is such an arrogant family that he might go back to his cell and scream and punch walls and do whatever he wants to do, but he was not going to give the state the satisfaction of showing that emotion and giving them that win. They already won by the verdict. He was not going to make that better for them by letting them know they got to him on a personal level. So he was stoic and he walked out. Guarantee you saw some emotion when he got back to his cell.
Taylor?
I don't think he goes to sleep tonight. I think he's going to struggle sleeping tonight because he's going to have to live with the fact that nobody believed what he had to say up there, and that he is responsible for destroying his entire family. So I think right there it showed the narcissism that's in him by standing there, no emotions whatsoever. We sat there and watched it together, and we looked at the screen, and he just stood there, no emotions, put his hands out like this to cuff him. Like 3 hours, I think he knew that was what was coming.
Yeah, and you knew probably too that he was seething underneath that. I mean, it's had to be seething not only at the jury but at his own attorneys. I think he had to be mad because he's an attorney. He knows what lost that case, and that's what the thing that gets me is. Just imagine him sitting there and watching this closing argument go down and knowing that they are really messing it up for him.
I agree with that 100%. I think if I'm sitting there And that's the closing argument that's being given. And it's easy for me to sit in this chair and say that. It's very easy for me to criticize here, the Monday morning quarterback. But there was absolutely no organization to closing argument by Jim Griffin.
Right.
Creighton Waters was long, but he had organization. He had it organized. Today, all we saw was rambling, like I said before, and nobody could keep track. Right. Nobody could keep track. So how do you think that the jurors were going to keep track when he was flipping through and couldn't even keep track with his own papers that he had there? And I think that showed that the government put more time and energy and organization into these closings, and it showed.
But do you think the case was won with Metters today? If there was some waffling by the jury because of Creighton Waters, as you say, with his closing?
Absolutely.
The tide turned today.
Absolutely, absolutely, John Metters, knocked in that game-winning RBI.
Mm-hmm.
He got up there with the emotions. He got up there. He had. You could feel it. You didn't even have to be in the courtroom. You could watch it. Most of us watched it being attorneys today, and you could feel it with him. And you weren't even in that same courtroom. Right. He was bleeding out everything that he had right there, and he did a heck of a job.
Now, we'll have to say too, though, that Creighton deserves credit because, like I said, I have never told anybody whether I think he's guilty or not. I am not that kind on my social media. I don't tell people whether I think he's guilty because I want you to watch the evidence of the trial. I don't want you to be non-biased. Watch the evidence and then decide, because if not, you end up with an O.J. Simpson type of situation where everybody's like, he's guilty, and they don't understand why he was found not guilty. So I tell everybody, watch this case and watch the evidence and then see if you still feel the same way. And I was doing that as well. So Creighton stood up and made his points, and he reminded me of some of the reasons why I felt he was guilty in the first place, even though I felt like he had not met his burden in the case in chief. He did. It was long and it went on and it was cumulative, but he did make his points in that and brought us. So he got us to the, let's say, second, third base, and then Metters knocked it home.
He absolutely he absolutely did do that. And during direct, I'd criticized Creighton the entire time on his witnesses and how he asked questions. I thought I thought he did a poor job cross-examining Alec. Apparently, I was wrong, or his closing sealed the deal, and he set it up for John. I absolutely believe that.
Well, briefly, you mentioned O.J. Simpson. He weighed in on this on Twitter today. As both of you know, he basically thought that Murdaugh might walk and not be convicted here. But back to the case here. All right, so. One thing that stood out to me today during Metters' argument, he went over to the jury box, he pulled the chair over. He talked about the caretaker, the parent's caretaker. Talked about her testimony, how it was true testimony, very real, as he put it, saying Murdaugh was like, oh, I was there 30 or 40 minutes. And she was like, no, good family, but no, he was there 20 minutes. And then visiting at 6:30 in the morning, showing up with what she thought was a blue tarp, turned out to be the raincoat that had the gunshot residue in it. To me, that resonated with the jury. It had to. I mean, that is a family member per se, a caretaker, saying, no, this did not happen. It's not happening the way you said it happened. This is the way it happened. So I thought that stood out in court.
When she immediately, he did bring out the fact too that she immediately called her brother and told her about him trying to convince her that, she was wrong about his timeline. And the funny thing to me is that I don't know how he forgot that there's GPS tracking on your phone. Clearly he knew that to leave it at the house, but there was no way that would work unless he was like messing around outside for 10 minutes and that was what he was worried about. And we don't know. Maybe he was messing around and hiding stuff outside and then came back later and got it. But the timeline works. He was gone an hour, 9:06 to 10:07, I think was the 911 call. And so 20 minutes to get there, 20 minutes to get back, 20-minute visit. Yeah. That works. So how he could even think that making his visit longer would work for him or help him in any way is baffling to me.
Really dumb, and on his part, I guess, to show up at his parents' house with the raincoat and try to hide it and the caretaker sees it. I mean, they never found the guns, but yet, you know, he takes the raincoat to his parents' house, puts it in a closet, they get the search warrant, they find it there. A big piece of evidence here, Taylor.
So I'm still not necessarily, though, convinced that the raincoat was what was used. I am not convinced of that. If it was, absolutely that having that, finding gunpowder, GSR within the raincoat, that, you know, makes it appear like he brought the guns there. I don't think we're ever going to know the truth of what actually happened and what actually went down.
We won't.
But I think the government decided we're going to put everything that we found in front of this jury, and we're going to let them decide what happened, or if we proved it enough that he's the only possible suspect here. And that's what they did.
Right. All right. So again, sentencing is 9:30 in the morning. He could get 30 years to life for both murder counts. What happens in the morning, Lori? At 9:30 in the morning, take us through the day in court. What's going to happen?
Well, so at 9:30 there, you know, all the parties will come in, and did he excuse the jury? He excused the jury tonight. So the parties will come in, and he'll ask Alex Murdaugh to come and take his place standing in front of him instead of at the defense table. So he stands in front of the judge, and the judge will then hear victim impact testimony. So Maggie's family, and there was the victim's advocate that was in the courtroom the entire time on behalf of her family. So they may have prepared a statement, but either way, some kind of statement will be read, more than likely from her family. Buster, believe it or not, is considered a victim too, even though he's sitting behind his dad. He's a victim because he lost his mom and his brother. He would be allowed to speak. I don't think he will. But once they have spoken, then, and Judge Newman does not limit this testimony. He lets everybody speak who wants to speak, and does not cut them off at all. So anybody who would want to speak on behalf of the victims will go first, and then anybody who wants to speak on behalf of Alex Murdaugh will go. I think maybe John Marvin might have something to say. He will ask Alex Murdaugh if he has anything he wants to say, and then I don't think Alex Murdaugh will say much other than, I maintain my innocence and I plan on filing an appeal. I did not kill my wife and son. I think he will make some kind of statement because he is a showman, and he is that classic narcissist type personality. I think he'll feel like he needs to say something to get the last word in.
Taylor, do you think that Murdaugh will make some sort of statement, or will Dick Harpootlian and Jim Griffin get to him and say, look, don't say anything, we're going to appeal this and move forward?
That would be the first time they ever told him to stop talking.
I don't know. They might have told him to stop talking before. I don't know. You know, I like to be a fly on the wall during some of their conversations, likely, in their decision making, because I never. I mean, that's not the question you asked, but I never saw a theory in this case to start with, and so I've just questioned this defense the entire way through. I do believe that Alec, the narcissism in him, is going to have him get up there and again deny any responsibility for this. However, I don't think that necessarily affects his appeal because he's not making any kind of admission that can be used against him. Now, if he gets up there and makes an admission, which I don't expect him to come on after a jury finds him guilty, while I respect the jury process, I'm going to tell you Alex Murdaugh doesn't respect the jury process in this particular situation. So I don't expect him to get up there and make some, admission, oh, I'm so sorry that I did this. I don't expect that. I expect him potentially to get up there and cry about losing his wife and his son, and that may be real emotion because he may regret what he did. But at the end of the day, I don't expect any kind of grand emotion.
There's been a lot of coverage with this trial for so long now, not only here locally, but all across the country and around the world. Netflix, with their 3-part series that just came out not too long ago. Jury members are told not to talk about things and not to look at things, but do you guys think that all of this coverage may have influenced this case in any way?
I would like to think that it didn't, but there's no way
There's
no way.
No way.
There's basically no way that they didn't hear about it beforehand. I think that they absolutely had heard about this case, even if they said they didn't. But it's been everywhere. I mean, just when they leave the courtroom, they leave the courthouse, they see the media set up. They know what's going on. So yeah, I think that they saw something. They had to have seen some of this on the media. And the Netflix special, we've talked about that before. I still think it's extremely ironic that they have a teacher testifying. They interviewed a teacher in this Netflix special. He's in the second episode, right within the first third of it, and he's in the third episode too. But that teacher, who is a teacher in Hampton, said he taught Mallory, and he actually is a disbarred attorney. He stole $1.3 million from his clients. And so the irony of having him in this documentary, they thought he was a teacher, and they didn't. Yeah, they clearly didn't do their homework. He literally stole. He's a disbarred attorney and stole $1.3 million. And yeah, I saw him sitting there, and I was like, anyway. So that's a total aside. But yes, I did think that they had to see.
Yeah, there's no way. So I was grabbing my phone. There's no way they didn't log on to their social media accounts for the last 6 weeks and not be scrolling through and not see anything. They absolutely saw something.
Yeah.
Everyone in the world has watched this trial. You've talked about people from South Africa. You've talked about people, I think you said Australia one day, all over the world. There's no way they didn't scroll through there and watching the news, whether it be any channel that they watch, not see something. To me, the coverage may have had an influence. I hope it didn't.
Right.
I hope they listened to the judge's instructions, because that's why we have those instructions. You know, I believe in freedom of the press because this is newsworthy. However, you know, that's a fine line when you've got a jury, and when you didn't sequester them, which I understand, no jurors want to spend 6 weeks in hotel rooms being escorted back and forth. They need to see their families at night. But absolutely, I believe that there was probably a little bit of outside influence in what they saw.
It's pure speculation, but you think he's going to get the book thrown at him tomorrow?
I think he'll get life.
I think he'll get life, but I don't think it matters, because he, at his
30
age,
years.
30 years is going to be a life sentence for him. He will leave prison in a pine box unless there's some appeal that works out in his favor.
Absolutely.
Right. Well, that sentencing is tomorrow morning at 9:30. We will be there for that. You can watch on all of our social media platforms. You can watch on WLTX Plus. You can watch on our YouTube page. You can watch on our website, WLTX.com. We'll have team coverage there tomorrow as well. Full reports tomorrow on News 19 in the afternoon and in the evening. So this trial starts in January. It ends in March. 3/2/23, I believe, is the date, Judgment Day for Alex Murdaugh.
The
Taylor?
longest trial in South Carolina.
Yeah, one of them.
Is it really?
Yes, it is.
It is the longest?
It's the longest.
Longest trial in South Carolina. All right, thanks for that tidbit,
Yeah.
Lori. Taylor, thank you as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for being with us.